Test? Perfect. Fantastic. All right. So in the last session, I just caught the tail end of it. We heard that we've really had enough of panels and that we need to start talking about action. And I'm hoping that this session does exactly that. So I'm very glad to be here today and together with two expert co-panelists have a conversation around how you actually create effective transition plans and move your company through the strategic planning process of developing your climate strategies. So just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Ira Pönsken. I'm the technical lead of the UK Transition Plan Task Force. I'll say a bit more about what that organization is, but essentially I've been working on developing guidance and a framework for companies to help them along the transition planning journey for the last year and a half. But before I get started with my presentation, I want to ask Renard and Massa to briefly introduce themselves because they'll be bringing in the excellent practitioner perspective.
Hello, everyone. I'm Renard. I'm the head of corporate sustainability for Yinson. It's an energy infrastructure and services company. I've been in sustainability, I think, for close to more than a decade now. Like, obviously, very passionate in the climate transition, or energy transition story.
Hi, my name is Masa Takanashi. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of SMBC, one of the three large Japanese banks. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Well, while I present, I'm gonna sit down later and ask others to stand. I always find it easier when talking through slides to actually have a bit of room for movement. But let's get started. So, what is the TPT first of all? So, 2 years ago, the UK government announced that it was going to move towards making transition planning mandatory across the economy and ask its companies who have developed and have set themselves climate targets to actually go further and then set out how it is that they're actually planning to reach those targets. At the same time, there was a recognition that there actually isn't a lot of guidance out there as to what good practice transition planning actually looks like and what that means. So the government gave a mandate to a task force to bring together experts from finance, real economy, civil society, and academia to develop a framework for gold standard disclosures on transition plans, as well as implementation guidance that can help firms get started on that journey, develop confidence in their strategic planning approach, and then publish their first transition plan. So that's the Transition Plan Task Force. In the UK context, what we do directly informs future regulation. So the UK Financial Conduct Authority, for example, has said that they will be drawing on our work to inform future listing requirements. But a lot of what we do builds very strongly on some of the international infrastructure that is already out there on climate-related disclosures and aligns with international best practice. So we really think that a lot of the guidance should hopefully be really applicable anywhere in the world, no matter where you are. So the secretariat of the task force is formed by the UK Centre for Greening Finance and Investment. That's where I'm from. I'm the deputy head of policy there. That's a consortium of universities that are trying to bridge the gap between academia and the finance sector and help the finance sector in developing better analytics on climate and nature. And we work closely together with a climate think tank called E3G. And as that secretariat team over the last year and a half, we've been working very, very closely together with a broad range of stakeholders across various different sectors to develop the core recommendations, which you can see on the next slide. So 2 weeks ago, we launched the TPT disclosure framework. That sets out all of the plans of what we think good practice transition plans should cover. And then to accompany that, a whole range of guidance pieces. Most importantly, you can see a little screenshot of our website on the left-hand side, right-hand side. And what we have there is additional guidance where you can explore the disclosure recommendations as well as a transition planning cycle, which gives guidance on all of the steps that you might want to move through as you develop your first transition plan or as you develop that approach over time. We're conscious that there's also other frameworks, et cetera, out there, so we also directly provided a mapping of what we do to the ISSB, of what we do to the TCFD, as well as the European reporting standards that were finalized this year as well. So there's a heaps of resources there that are now live. The framework is also finalized. We're working on further sector guidance. But what I really want to talk you through today is just a snapshot of where it is that we've landed in terms of what do we think a good and strategic approach to transition planning looks like for companies, and how can you get there. So before I dive in, a few words on why we think transition plans matter and why they're an important step for companies to take. So over the last couple of years, what we've seen is companies are becoming increasingly aware that climate change poses material risks and opportunities. And no matter where you are in the world, the likelihood that you'll either be facing physical impacts or transition risks are high. And this is something that I think probably many of you in the room I'm preaching to the converted here, you guys will know. But that's I think, an evolution that we've seen in the financial sector and the real economy over the last couple of years. Increasingly, companies have then come out and said, okay, well, in response to those risks, we'll set ambitious climate pledges. We'll come out with our net zero climate target, and we'll set that at 2035, 2040, 2050, depending on who and where you are. But that is part of our response to those climate risks. The next step in that climate journey is then to say, okay, a pledge without a plan is a wish. How are you actually planning to get there? So what steps are you implementing now to make sure that that target that you've set yourself for 2035, 2040, or 2050 can actually be reached? And this is where transition plans come in, and this is why we think they're the next step in the climate governance journey. So transition plans are the tool that allow companies to marry that long-term ambitions to the steps that they're taking now and bridge the gaps over the time horizons. In terms of who they're actually useful for, first and foremost, it's the reporting entity itself. It's the entity that is going through the process of building a holistic vision across the firm and saying, okay, building a common sense of these are the steps that we need to take, have a strategic leadership vision of where we want to go, and then almost a to-do list of the steps that you're taking over the next couple of years to get there. In addition, though, we see a lot of different additional use cases to that. There's investors and lenders for the information in transition plans where companies provide a forward-looking estimation of where they're planning to go is important for pricing risk and making more informed capital allocation decisions. For policymakers and regulatory authorities, it can be an important source of information in terms of knowing what is it that your industry is dependent on in order for them to transition. What policy changes do they need to see in order for them to be able to manage the challenges of this journey successfully? You see supervisors and regulators starting to use these plans, so that's a conversation that we have a lot in the UK context and internationally, where supervisors are starting to think through, okay, how can we use the information in this plan to actually distinguish between greenwashing and non-greenwashing companies, have a more informed understanding of which companies are actually taking the steps to manage this transition, and also what does their transition plan say about their risk profile going forward. So there's a lot of information there that's important to supervisors and regulators. There's other stakeholders who might have various different reasons for why it is that they want to understand whether companies are actually walking the walk. They can be important inputs into financial instruments and products. So if you think about the challenges of scaling up transition finance, transition plans have a really important role to play because they, again, allow you to distinguish between the firms that are starting to actually move forwards and take steps now and those that have set ambitious targets, but are doing very little today to actually get there. And then there's wider uses in the wider capital market ecosystem in terms of informing credit ratings that you can think about, various different data servers that might draw on this. But this is kind of the ecosystem that can develop around transition plans. So what actually makes a good practice transition plan? Within the TPT, we've started off from the recommendations of the ISSB, which recently launched its inaugural first two standards. In its climate-related standard, it actually puts forward a definition of a transition plan, which says that a climate-related transition plan is an aspect of an entity's overall strategy that lays out the entity's targets, actions, and resources for its transition towards a lower carbon economy. There's two things that I really want to point to in that definition. The first thing is, it's an aspect of an entity's overall strategy. That piece is absolutely crucial. A transition plan is not a sideline sustainability report where you're thinking about kind of the edges. It's not exclusively a statement about risks and opportunities. It's about corporate strategy. It's about who your company is. It's about what your company is doing and what role it will play in tomorrow's economy. So it's a conversation that needs to happen at quite a senior level, and where you need to be asking difficult questions, probably, around where you are now and where you want to go and how you're going to get there. The second piece is about this piece around the lower carbon economy. At the end of the day, the transition plan is not only about how you're greening your own balance sheet, it's about what steps you're taking to contribute to the wider economy, the economy-wide transition. So the end goal that we're working towards is not individual green balance sheets. The end goal that we're working towards is a decarbonized economy. And as we've set out in our good practice recommendation on top of that, a low greenhouse gas emissions, climate resilient economy. So in our recommendations, we say that everything that you do in a transition plan, it flows from the strategic ambition that you've set yourself as a firm. And that strategic ambition, it comprises your objectives and priorities for responding and contributing to the transition towards a low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient economy. In addition, it should set out how you're pursuing these objectives and priorities in a manner that captures opportunities and avoids adverse impacts for stakeholders and societies and safeguards the natural environment. So a successful good practice transition plan cannot come at the cost of other sustainability aims. In terms of the approach that we think entities should be taking as they start developing these plans, we organize everything we do around 3 principles, and those principles are ambition, action, and accountability. So starting with ambition, transition plans need to reflect the urgency to act. The evidence that we need to act on climate change is abound. There's no longer a question about the why there, and we need to make sure that transition plans reflect that and take appropriate science-based benchmarks for action. You see this graphic here on the right is where we're trying to push the thinking across the economy at the moment is that for entities to plan successful transition plans that are actually ambitious, they need to be thinking beyond their decarbonization targets. So we say decarbonization targets are one channel of what are actually 3 channels of taking a strategic and rounded approach to transition planning. The first channel is decarbonizing, and decarbonizing across scopes 1, 2, and 3 is important. But alongside that, you need to manage your risks and opportunities of the transition, and you need to think about how you can contribute to an economy-wide transition. Now, those 3 aspects are overlapping. Sometimes there's actions that you take that can help across all 3. Sometimes there's trade-offs there. And the important thing is that companies start thinking about those trade-offs and develop an approach that appropriately manages those. The second principle that we have then is action. The difference between a climate target and a transition plan is that the transition plan should be translating those overarching ambitions into the steps that you're actually going to be taking over the next years. So think about what you're doing in the next first 1, 2, and 3 years, as opposed to only focusing on 2030. And then the third piece around accountability. So we think it's important that transition plans are actually enabled through robust reporting systems and robust governance within an entity's organization. So building on those 3 principles, we have developed a disclosure framework that covers 5 building blocks. The first one is foundations. So this is everything about the objectives that you've set yourself, how you think this will impact your business model and value chain at the high level, as well as what are the key assumptions and dependencies that underpin your plan. Then there's 2 pieces of strategy to think about. The first one is implementation strategy. That's everything that you're doing internally to your company. How does this impact the products and services that you're offering? How does it impact your business operations? But then there's also the external facing piece, the engagement strategy. So if you are, for example, dependent on your value chain to move, then how are you engaging with your value chain to enable that action to take place? If you're dependent on industry peers, then how are you engaging with those? How is your government engagement aligned with the strategic ambition that you've set yourself in your transition plan? Then the 4th and 5th piece, it should be quite familiar for everyone that has looked at TCFD. You have metrics and targets. So what targets have you set and how are you measuring progress against them? And then the 5th piece is around governance, which is all about who's responsible for enabling delivery of the plan within your company. So what role does the board play in this conversation? What role does senior management play? How are you aligning your culture to fit with your transition strategy? Incentives and remuneration, etc. We have made sure that our recommendations are closely aligned with some of the voluntary best practice that is out there at the moment. So those of you who will have looked at the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero and their transition planning guidance might recognize those 5 elements. In order to build a consistent approach to transition planning, we've leveraged those and structured our disclosure recommendations accordingly. So this is the framework that came out. This is as we call it, the gold standard for transition planning disclosures that we've now provided as recommendations to the UK government. And We are glad to say that we are already starting to see companies within the UK context start to develop their transition plans in line with this guidance. Of course, we know that many companies are only starting out now, and there's going to be many questions and many gaps and many uncertainties that companies face. To help companies along that journey, we also put out what we call the transition planning cycle, which is just indicative guidance of the different steps that companies might want to move through as they develop their first plan or iterate and evolve their approach over time. So this starts from kind of reassessing, starting off with understanding your risks and opportunities, setting your ambition, planning your actions, and then finally implementing your plan. We've quite consciously designed this as a cycle. We know that the first transition plan, NT's first transition plan, is not going to look the same as its third or fourth iteration. We recommend that companies update their plans at the latest every 3 years, because you'll be learning over time, you'll be building out your data capabilities over time. There might be assumptions that you've made that will change over time, as you see, for example, certain technologies developing faster or more slowly than you expected. But that is okay. It is okay for a first transition plan to have gaps, and you would expect companies to have those gaps. But the important thing is that you, from the get-go, realize that you can build on that over time. You can communicate what are the uncertainties that you have now, and then think about what steps you can take in the next 2 and 3 years to make sure that the next transition plan is more evolved. And on our website, what you'll find is there's this guidance hub where we not only set out the individual steps, we've supplemented that with case studies from companies that are already doing bits and pieces of this process. And we have a whole load of kind of links to external resources that can help you along. So there's places where we, for example, we'll link to the GHG protocol at the relevant steps, we'll link to the SBTI, and provide a hub where a lot of those, that alphabet soup of sustainability guidance is brought together into a consistent cycle that can help you get going. But I'll maybe end there with just a quick plug in terms of what you can expect from us going forward. So there'll be further publications coming from the TPT. First and foremost, we have sector-specific guidance that is coming out in the middle of November. We'll be consulting on that, so there'll be an opportunity to provide feedback. We'll be finalizing that guidance by early 2024. And at that time, we'll also be publishing kind of a forward pathway on transition plans where we just elaborate a little bit more around what is it that we think we need to see from the market and from regulators and policymakers going forward to make transition plannings actually take off and make sure that companies have the ecosystem that they need for this, to develop effective plans. But I think I'll maybe leave it there and hand over to some practitioner perspectives.
Hello, good afternoon. When I was first given this topic, like seamless progress, crafting effective transition plans, to be very frank, I wasn't sure if I'm the right person to actually be doing this masterclass. Because in my own experience of actually crafting, a climate transition plan, it's really anything but seamless. Seamless means smooth, unperturbed. And I can tell you, through life experiences, that's definitely not the case from a practitioner's perspective. Now, Yinson is basically a company that covers basically 5 business divisions. Energy transition is core to our business. Apart from the offshore production side, we have also, in the past couple of years, really ramped up renewables, green tech, and also set up Farrison, an assets under management company, to look at, the energy, to facilitate the energy transition narrative. There's obviously a lot of growing investor expectations, as you know. This is an extremely busy slide. You can see TCFD, General 100, Climate Action 100. All of them are pushing for a credible climate transition story. And this is our life experience. Now, there are a couple of principles that Yinson adopts, right, in basically trying to craft out this transition plan. I think the first and most important thing is really around accountability. Like, who takes responsibility, for ensuring that there is proper implementation and execution? Yeah, you need to ensure that your processes are align. So there needs to be integration. It needs to be internally coherent and integrated, your boards, C-suites, all the way down to your middle management and the business units, people who are operating on the ground needs to understand what the climate transition plan is about. We need to be forward-looking as well. I mean, we're under pressure. Our business is a very capital-intensive unit, and with all the financiers and bankers that are in this room today, I mean, clearly, everyone is trying to push for the net zero agenda. It's one of the most commonly cited phrase every time when we go into any sort of ESG investor relations meeting. Front, back, left, center, net zero, net zero, net zero has constantly come up to the fore. But really, what are we doing about this? A credible transition plan needs to be time-bound. It needs to be quantitative. So it's no longer enough to just talk about things qualitatively. You need to put numbers in, and we need to have smart KPIs, which I'll touch a little bit on this later on. The plan also needs to be flexible to a certain extent because it is catering for quite a number of stakeholders, and more importantly, completeness. The data sets that we have, before we even claim that we want to be carbon neutral or net zero, do we actually have all the data sets in place? And this is really where some of the challenges are. But to sum it all, these are the principles that we are living by. And of course, there are a lot of elements, right, within a credible climate transition plan. If you started doing a mapping, which was what we did against the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures Act, you know that there are 4 core elements around governance, risk management, matrix and targets, and of course, strategy. How are you going to be delivering on the targets that you set out to achieve? And these were basically substantive elements that we had to go through, each and every one of them. Having said so, this is not only the purview, right, of the core sustainability team. We had to engage with quite a broad range of internal stakeholders, those in the risk management side of the business, our CFO, because obviously you need resourcing, right, in order to back up a credible transition plan. It's not going to happen overnight. We have to pump in money, resources, and ensure that we have the right people at the right place to be able to deliver this. So the exercise is quite extensive. We really went down to the level of really analyzing, looking at our CAPEX, OPEX. Is it sufficient, to support what we have committed to, what we claim that we are going to do? And of course, we also rely quite a lot on CDP's climate transition plan. This was way before the TPT actually came up. And they have actually done quite a reasonable mapping against a lot of the different standards, frameworks, that talks about climate transition. So we have actually used this as a basis to inform a lot of the decisions, a lot of the criteria, what sort of KPIs do we need to do. For most people, it's a checklist of items, but for us, it's really an opportunity to see if we have actually missed out on key pertinent points. So in some ways, it's a gap analysis with, clear action plans. So this is how we have actually laid this out progressively. So I've covered a few things, right, on the principles. I've covered some of the elements of a climate transition plan. Now let's talk a little bit about the process flow that we've adopted. I think this is not rocket science. To most people, I think, when we talk about how do you actually go about developing a transition plan, this was basically essentially the 5 steps that we took. Number 1, we look at what the gaps were. We need to prioritize our stakeholders. So there was a prioritization matrix that we went through. We spoke to, the financial people because we needed to make sure that there's proper resourcing and budgeting, and then we had to basically seek approval. The gap analysis that we did was really anchored around the source of risks that we were experiencing, both from a physical and transition risk. I won't go into too much detail because a lot of this has already been articulated very clearly in TCFD. There are case studies, examples that everyone can refer to. Of course, having said so, they are unique in a sense that they are specific to different industry sectors. In terms of the scenarios that we took on, I think there were 2 that was mentioned in our climate report. The first is the stated policy scenario. So this is really anchoring, right, the future on existing policies that are employed worldwide. So we sort of did a cross-validation against countries, like where we had an operations in. We deep dive. We look at what these countries were talking about in terms of the policies and how is it going to affect, the future of our business across, the 5 divisions that we had. Another scenario that we looked at was the sustainable development scenario, right? Which really looks at ambitious climate policies and some of the targets that some countries have set, right, in wanting to change the energy system that has been implemented. Both of this were back then recommended by the IEA, the International Energy Agency, and being an energy infrastructure and services company, it was quite natural for us to actually anchor ourselves, right, on these scenarios and to look at where, we fell short of. So in our climate report, which covers, the climate transition plan, you can see all of our risk drivers, what the impact descriptions were, and the heat maps that we have created. This was quite a tedious process, I have to say. Once again, nothing about this, right, is seamless. There was a lot of iterative process going back and forth between, internal stakeholders, trying to get external stakeholders as well to provide inputs. The process in itself, I would say, wasn't smooth at all. There was a lot of changes that we had to make, a lot of different iterations, a lot of pain points, right, that we had to go through before we could actually develop this. So it covers quite a lot of areas. Now, I just want to touch a little bit on stakeholder engagement. So when we started figuring out who, we wanted to engage with, we adopted the BCG salience model, where we really analyzed, right, and broke down our stakeholders by the type of power that they had, the urgency, and so the legitimacy that they have. So each of them actually, were ranked in terms of high priority, medium, and low priority. Obviously, the high priority ones, the frequency of engagement, right, needed to be higher. We needed to be more effective in the way that we solicit feedback from our different stakeholders. Another model, of course, that we tested out was BSR's 5-step engagement model. But the whole process behind stakeholder engagement for us is really about, number 1, validation. Number 2, to really ensure that we have successfully or effectively identified where the opportunities are as well in our transition plan. And of course, having identified them, we typically go through a prioritization matrix. And then, when we talk about resourcing and budget, I think this is absolutely key. And we tend to find that, some companies tend to leave this out. So a lot of their net zero commitments, the transition plans that are put out, right, are not strongly backed, right, by figures and numbers. And I think this is really an area that, we have to push for, because otherwise you're just going to be making empty promises, empty statements on net zero, without actually having proper, credible resources that's backing up your action plans. So I cannot emphasize enough, right, that resourcing and budgeting, right, is absolutely crucial. Yeah. In terms of governance, of course, at Yinson, the way that this is done is that we have a sustainability committee, which reports every quarterly to the Board Risk and Sustainability Committee. So they actually, keep a pulse check on where we are in terms of the targets and milestones that we have set to deliver on the climate transition plan that we put out. This is Yinson's 3-pronged climate strategy. We focus first and foremost on carbon reduction, looking at how we are cutting down on greenhouse gas emissions for scope 1, 2, and 3. Before we move on to things like carbon removal, right? So investing in nature-based solutions, afforestation, reforestation. I think there was a lot as well that was being said in the earlier panels this morning on carbon offsets. So for us, we have actually committed to really only looking at high-quality offsets. But even that is proving to be challenging. So, once again, it's not seamless. There's a lot of debates around, are you pursuing the right offsets? What is your go-to strategy in the market? Will you be inventorizing, right, the carbon credits that you have actually purchased, or will you be retiring them? Like, what is your go-to strategy? These are a lot of hard-hitting questions that I think corporate sustainability practitioners will have to face moving in, in the next couple of years. And we don't have answers to everything. Like, even if we went out to the market and purchased 1 million credits today, right, how do we account for it? Are they accounting standards already available to sort of guide that process? Question mark. And this is, the roadmap that we have produced. Once again, very iterative, a lot of internal engagement with, our business units, pushbacks as well to a certain extent. Because on one hand, when you talk about climate transition, you have to talk about peak emissions. Like when do you actually start bending the curve? And are businesses actually ready, for that scenario? So it's not an easy, solution to all of this. Once again, there's a lot of back-to-back, engagements, validation that was required. And then, after we are comfortable with our process, the next step is really, are we comfortable locking this in, the targets, the KPIs that we have set out, right, into, sustainable financing, Are we able to pursue, green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, and putting our targets and KPIs out there, Because that would really be a signal of how confident we are in terms of delivering on the transition plan that we have committed to. And these are some of the things that, I would say that we're at a stage where we are still exploring, we are learning, from different parties. But I would probably just sum up by saying that, never let perfection, right, get in the way of progress. We must always move forward. And I look forward to, hearing and having, much more conversations after this. And with that, I think my time is up. Thank you so much.
Hello, again, my name is Masa Takanashi. I'm from SMBC Group in Japan. I actually don't really have fancy slides. I only have 2 slides, so apologies for that. But I hope what I describe here will be some examples that I can show you for, especially financial institutions, because this is, this is exactly what's written in our transition plan. I think for effective transition plans, obviously I think these have been referred to already, but we need to incorporate into corporate strategy and also operations as well. I think stakeholder engagement, as we discussed, is very, very important. And again, I think we're still working on a living document. It's going to be revised on a frequent basis, and I hope it's going to be getting better and better. So our transition plan is basically based on, the GFAN's transition plan guidelines, and I think it follows the TPT as well. In terms of foundations, what's really, I think, very important for us is that what we really want to achieve is to decarbonize the real economy rather than our balance sheet. So obviously we do have a target to net zero by 2050, as mentioned in the middle. But again, what we really want to do is realize a decarbonized society, and we need to support our customers' transition as a financial institution. And in terms of governance, like other financial institutions, we do have obviously supervision by the board of directors, and we also have a sustainability committee, that's an internal committee within the board of directors. We do have people from the academia and research in the sustainability committee, so that we can get insight from these people. And we also, in terms of governance, have incorporated ESG metrics, such as finance emissions, into our executives' compensation system as well. And this is also evolving, on a annual basis. In terms of skills and culture, obviously we need to educate directors, executives, employees, and like other financial institutions, we have training sessions for directors as well. But what actually has been very, very effective is especially for our employees, is actually business, which I will be talking to later on. We also have a very famous figure on our global advisor, Mr. Paul Pullman, who is the vice chair of UN Global Compact, and also obviously the former CEO of Unilever as well. Now, what I was referring to in terms of education is our products and services. So we have various products and services that we provide to our clients, but this has been actually an education tool for our employees as well. As said in the top, it says GHG emission visualization services. We have, especially domestically, we have a online tool that we provide to our clients so that they can, visualize, calculate their GHG emissions. But for our, employees, our bankers, to be able to actually pitch these things to our clients, our bankers needs to understand what, scope 1, 2, 3 is, what GHG emission is, a GHG protocol. So, more than the training sessions, these products that we actually provide to our clients has been a very good educational tool to our employees as well. Secondly, where it says business co-creation, what we mean is that obviously our clients have various issues around how to reduce GHG emissions, and as a financial institutions, we don't actually have the real solutions. We obviously have consulting services, we have financing services, but we don't really have the direct solutions. But what we do have is networks. So we do have a large network of clients that actually have those those solutions. So what we are doing as a financial institution is partnering with these clients to provide real solutions to clients that have issues around reducing their GHG emissions. And obviously, we do have other products such as green deposits, carbon credit business, and sustainable finance products as well. In terms of other areas, second row, activities and decision making, we do have a risk appetite framework. So finance emissions is included in our risk appetite framework as well, and therefore that also is one of the tools that have tried to engage our employees as well. So for the risk appetite framework kind of controls our whole portfolio, whereas the risk analysis and management for individual companies is more on an individual basis. So we control our balance sheet both on a risk appetite, a portfolio basis, and also a client basis as well. And other financial institutions, we do have a phase-out strategy for coal mining and coal-fired power generation sectors as well. In terms of the engagement strategy, we establish what we call our transition finance playbook. This is basically it's a definition of SMBC's definition of transition finance. So the word transition finance, we hear it a lot, but there is no common, definition of what transition finance is. And therefore, we created our SMBC's definition of transition finance, and actually we published it. It's on our website. There are various reasons that we did this. First of all is internally. So until we had this, our bankers did not, they were kind of confused of the word transition finance. They didn't understand what deals they were able to do and what deals they weren't able to. And also externally, we were able to talk to our clients directly, our definition of transition finance. So this was actually, we are very, very glad that we were able to do this. We weren't necessarily expecting this effect at the beginning, but by creating this transition finance playbook, it allowed our bankers actually to engage with our clients much, much better than before, because our bankers cannot just go to our clients and say, "Can we discuss your transition plan?" It doesn't work that way. You need a guide or some starting point to discuss with your clients. So this transition finance playbook has worked as a kind of starting point or a door knock tool that we can go to our clients to actually discuss. So it has been a very, very good tool to engage with our clients as well. In terms of industry, obviously we are working with the GFANS, NZBA, PCAF, IIF, and also we are a founding member of the Japanese Hydrogen Association as well. Metrics and targets, again, like other financial institutions, we have sustainable finance KPIs, we have finance emission reduction targets as well. But I think as I said at the very, very beginning, what we really want to do is not necessarily, green our balance sheet. What we really want to do is green the real economy. And therefore, we do think that we need probably additional KPIs that can actually show that. So people now are talking about avoided emissions, expected emission reductions. We are also seriously looking at these KPIs and following up on discussions that are going around in the globe. So I hope you look at this transition plan and say, well, how is this better? How is this worse? And I hope this will be some reference. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you both. I think we have plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to turn to the room. I think we can either kind of raise your hands and just use the microphones and just ask questions directly if you want. Or if not, I think there's a Slido where you can submit them and then we can... I can already see them here. Perfect. So I think, first of all, there's a question to you, Renat, whether you can share your slides.
Sure, not just the slides, but we have a climate report that's publicly available on a corporate website, so feel free to download that. I think we are very transparent about the sorts of climate-related risks that we face. And I look forward to your feedback, because this is also a way that we socialize, and as I said earlier, you are a stakeholder, so you gauge and let us know if we're doing things in the right manner and how can we improve.
Perfect. I think the second question is, again, for you. I can read it out if you have. It's, how does Jensen factor in sectoral decarbonization pathways in transition planning in the absence of policies like LTLEDs? Or is it not necessary?
Yeah, I think this is an ongoing conversation, I would say, that we are exploring for sure. I think what's really tricky with Jensen is that we still have a business in the offshore side, so that really disqualifies us from really looking at the SBTI, because it's a work in progress for the longest time, even though we have aggressively expanded into renewables and green tech. So it's something that we're definitely trying to push for. And as I've mentioned earlier, Jensen as a company, we are really, putting our money where our mouth is and really trying to drive that sort of energy transition story. And you can see even in Malaysia, we've aggressively really expanded into charging EV stations, really focusing on e-leasing mobility services, onshore, offshore, really working very closely with our partners as well, to help with the decarbonization initiatives here.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of how, as a company, to think about what levers do you have to engage around you and help the ecosystem around you move if you're seeing that it's not there yet.
I'm seeing a lot of my name, right, on Slido. Maybe a question for Masa.
Yes, I can maybe post the first one on the screen. It's, how do companies avoid from being accused of greenwashing for genuinely not being able to meet their own transition plan due to unforeseen circumstances? Masa, would you like to take a crack? I can also add perspectives.
Yes. Obviously, we take third-party opinions as well, but also I think it's very important to be very honest. So what we can't do is we will disclose that what we can't do. So honesty, I think, is very, very important.
Yeah, just to maybe add a little bit on that in terms of our thinking within the TPT framework. Something that we baked very much into the foundational piece is this sub-element around assumptions and the external factors on which you depend. Because it's very clear that if you have a plan that goes out to 2050, there's going to be unforeseen circumstances, there's going to be policies that change, there's going to be costs of technologies that change that are different to the assumptions that you're building in now. However, if you make those assumptions that you're building into your planning transparent from the get-go, and those assumptions later change because reality around you has changed, that gives you that freedom to move and say, yes, 3 years ago we said X, but we also thought that Y was going to happen, Z happened, so we're going to have to change that X and explain that to your stakeholders. The transition plan is a tool that allows you to communicate that to your stakeholders in a way that's that takes them on the journey. As long as, again, from the get-go, you're transparent about what is it that you don't know now, and what is it that you're assuming will happen, but you can't know because it's forward-looking, and unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball that would make a lot of this a lot easier. And also, there's things that you find difficult to know now, such as supply chain data, but where systems might emerge over time, where you know that in 3 or 4 years, you're probably going to have a much clearer picture, which means that your estimations, for example, of where your Scope 3 emissions lie, they're going to change. But again, if you make it clear from the get-go, these are the data gaps that I have, and these are the assumptions that I'm building on, you can explain that down the road, and that can still be a credible story to your stakeholders, to your investors, to your regulators, etc. Which is why, yeah, external dependencies and those assumptions are a fundamental building block that we think of disclosed transition plans. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Another one for you, which is about, do you have SMEs in your value chain? And if yes, how do you measure your Scope 3, given challenges surrounding data for SMEs?
Yeah, a short and simple answer to that is yes. Like, we do have SMEs in our value chain. But I think it's important to also note that Yinson's 97% of our emissions actually come from category 13 of Scope 3 on downstream lease assets. This is really on the offshore side because the nature of it is that it is leasing an asset to clients. So 97% of that comes from that. Then the remaining are 3% is basically the rest of the portfolio, including SMEs. So the way that we do this is that we have actually established quite a robust ESG supply chain policy. I think first and foremost, we need to be very clear of what our asks and expectations are from suppliers, vendors, the SMEs in our value chain, because if we are not even clear of what we are asking for, there's no point going to them and engaging and saying, hey, we need data from you. They'll look at you and say, for what, right? So a policy, first and foremost, is important. And then the next thing you realize is that, once again, going back to my theory of how all of this is not a seamless process, some SMEs are basically along a different level of maturity. Some are a little bit more mature, whereas others are just at the nascent starting stage of trying to set up a basic carbon accounting structure. For cases like that, a lot of hand-holding is needed at the very start. You need to give them templates, you need to point them to the right sets of resources, and you need to almost curate, a narrative saying that, if you actually embark and start embedding ESG into your business, there are some other perks that you can get, cheaper financing rate from certain banks, for example, and it's that sort of narrative that we need to almost handhold and build it together with them. And that has been our strategy. I have to say that it's still a work in progress. It's not perfect, but we're trying to get there. We're prioritizing our so-called Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers first. That forms the bulk of where a lot of our investments and basically money is, right? So it's a journey.
Yeah, work in progress seems to be a big theme around transition planning. Masa, I think there's another question here for you, which is, how is SMBC progressing on Scope 3? What work are you doing on financed emissions?
Yes, so we are a part of NZBA, Net Zero Banking Alliance. And the Net Zero Banking Alliance requires us to set midterm finance emission targets for the high-emitting 9 sectors. And for us, we need to submit or publish these targets by October 2024, which is next year. And we started from 3 sectors, so oil and gas, coal, and power. And we all have already published these targets for these 3 sectors. And for this fiscal year, we are adding steel and transportation as well. So up until now, we have calculated for 5 sectors, but so we have 4 to go.
Would you say it was a seamless progress of getting there?
Absolutely not. We're still struggling.
Yeah, that's what I guessed. Again, it's a common theme, but important to start the journey and kind of get the ball rolling.
Yep. So we're going to revise this every year, basically.
Great. I think the next question here is also, again, for you. There's a question here whether your transition finance playbook is available publicly, and whether the KPIs to support support decarbonization are only in the remuneration of all staff or only senior management.
Yes, our transition finance playbook is on our website. If we go to our website, it's on there. And by the way, this is also going to be, renewed, well, at least on an annual basis. And in terms of remuneration, yes, this is for senior executive management only at this moment. But again, we'll review this as we go along as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. There's a question here that keeps on popping up and then dropping down again, but I think it's an important one, so I want to answer it, which is whether transition planning by large UK corporates might unintendedly cause disorderly transition of their operations and supply chain, particularly for those located in EMDs. That's definitely a conversation that or I'd say a concern that we've heard within the TPT, and it's a conversation that we've had particularly with the more globally operating companies that are part of the task force and that are going to be, I mean, the London listed companies is a globally operating bunch. So this is, again, it's part of the reason for why we recommend that companies take what we call a strategic rounder approach. Because the question around how is it that you're taking what levers do you have available to support those around you to develop their transition plans and to enable the economy-wide decarbonization, that is taking a global picture, because ultimately it's not in any firm's interest to only have one part of the world decarbonize. Where we need to get to is the low greenhouse gas emissions, climate resilient world, because unfortunately that's how carbon emissions work. So it's again, that's part of the thinking why it is that we really encourage companies to think very holistically about the actions that they can take. Think about where they're dependent on others, and that includes their value chains that extend into emerging markets. And think about what actions they can take to support the value chains in that transition. It's definitely still an ongoing and evolving conversation, and it's something that that the TPT is also to continue to engage with actors around the world in, and that's part of, those kinds of conversations are the reasons why I'm here as well. But so yeah, if the asker of that question wants to kind of have an offline conversation about that as well, very happy to continue that. But then back to the other questions. So Renard, for corporates with multiple business lines across different sectors, should corporates develop separate transition plans, or is it possible to consolidate those?
Oh, this is a really hard one. I think for the case of Yinson, it's definitely a consolidated climate transition plan. As I've said earlier, we always position ourselves as a company that's at the heart of the energy transition. And everything that we do in renewables or green tech, right, in some way or another, they are tied together. So the way that we plan and strategize, right, is we really get all business units like in the same room. I lock the room and go, hey, this is all our carbon, baselines. This is where we need to go. We have two aspirations to be carbon neutral 2030, net zero 2050. Now, how are we going to get there? What are the action plans? What are the short, medium, long-term targets that we need to set? What are the technological solutions that we need to start implementing across our assets? Now, finance guy comes in. Now, this is the plan. Financing, approve or disapprove? And if you disagree, which areas? So that's the sort of iterative process, that we have to go through in order to have something that we are confident putting out in public. And of course, this plans as well, as I said earlier, for companies that are willing to take it, the extra step with aspirational KPIs, then by all means, have a look and pursue, sustainable financing and see where that goes, because there are a lot of principles, IGMAR principles that sort of guides that sort of transition story, right? If you claim that it's credible, you need to have a third independent party to come in and validate, that you are delivering on those targets, that you are delivering on that sort of performance. And this is, sorry, just part one of that response, right, from Yinsen's perspective, as to whether corporates should have separate transition plans, especially if they're in different sectors. I think this is a hard one. I don't know, would you have a perspective on that area?
I mean, I can share what it is that we recommend in the UK context, which is where we recommend that the entity that submits its financial filings is the same entity for whom the transition plan covers. So what the piece of information that you're covering within your financial statement should be the same pieces that are covered within your transition plans. So in the UK, if you're listed at the group level, then that's the transition plan. If you're listed at a subsidiary level, then that's the transition plan. But I think very important to echo that what you said about bringing in the different units of a company and developing that cross-organization vision is something that we've heard time and again from all of the companies that we've engaged throughout this process. And in every single roundtable, a company that has already started on this journey will say the most important thing is to, first of all, engage your board and make sure that they understand that this is a strategy decision. And then second of all, make sure that you have a structure in place that allows you to have a conversation across all of the business units and, again, develop that common understanding of where you want to go and really break it down then, what does that mean for your individual business divisions? What are maybe if you have a group level target, what does that actually mean for the individual parts of your company? Have the financing teams come in, and those are going to be the financing teams and the legal conversations. Those are usually the tricky ones. But make sure that those stakeholders internally within your firm are involved from the start, because ultimately they'll be required for the delivery. Because you can't, even if you have a sustainability function that writes a plan, you need the rest of the company to implement it. So the plan will be much better if you bring those stakeholders on board from the beginning and have that conversation across.
Yeah, it's just to add on, it's a painful but necessary process, is what I'm hearing.
Okay, Masa, I think there's another question here for you, which is, what is the biggest challenge in transition finance, and how did you get your customers and RMs on board?
Maybe I could start from the second question first. Well, there's various reasons that we started with this transition finance playbook, but one reason was that we saw that there is an issue with finance emissions KPIs. So although we would like to finance our clients' transition through transition finance, when we do, actually our finance emissions go up rather than down, especially if we're providing finance to high-emitting sectors. What we are trying to do is that when we disclose, we just started transition finance, so we haven't disclosed yet. But in the end, what we want to do is disclose our finance emissions, but we want to show if it's, probably it's going to be increasing because we are providing transition finance to our clients because we want to, support our clients. But we also would like to show, how transition finance is affecting those finance emissions. And therefore, when we talk to our clients and also our RMs, if it fits our transition finance guidelines, then we will be able to, much easily, finance those projects or those, provide finance. And therefore, by doing that, we are able to engage with our clients and also RMs as well. But the difficulty is that because it's so technical, we do follow, for instance, various taxonomies and guidelines all around the world, and it's so technical. Therefore, it is very difficult for our RMs to kind of completely understand what's actually written in the guidebook, and that we're still, in the process of educating our RMs. Thank you.
Seamlessly, of course.
Definitely.
Yes. Again, seamless. I think from my side, just to add a point on there on the financed emission piece, I think again that's something that we've tried to focus on quite a bit in the TPT as well. If you open up the framework, there's actually there's an entire page of unintended consequence of an exclusive focus on net zero, which we think is a very important conversation to have both. I mean, for the finance sector, very, very importantly, but it also applies in the real economy. If you have companies that exclusively try to decarbonize their own balance sheet, that might not actually contribute to decarbonizing the real economy. And the challenge is figuring out how do you finance a company that is transitioning without that being relativistic. So we balance that in two ways. We say, think beyond your decarbonization targets, but at the same time, it is absolutely important that the companies that you're financing are also disclosing what pathway they're aligning to. What is it that they're using to benchmark their ambitions? How do NDCs play a role in their transition plan? What sectoral pathways are they using to inform their planning? Because that will ultimately then, that allows you to get that nuance of, we need to finance the sectors that need to transition, but we need to make sure that we're actually financing their transition and not just extending financing for business as usual. So the role of external benchmarks and pathways is absolutely critical in that one. There's a question here, Massa. Maybe again, I'll pose this one for you, and this is probably the last one that we have time for, which is, how do you assess the quality of the transition plan of clients? Have you already started thinking about that? Again, I imagine it's an early conversation.
Yes, we are trying to put a framework within internally to assess our clients' transition plan. We do have, it's still in a draft, but we have like 20 questions that we have that we can use to check our client's transition plan. After we've done that, we will obviously, probably kind of rate our transition plans, and maybe it might go into internal or carbon pricing as well.
Okay, fantastic. All right, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for the conversation. And yeah, do pick up offline if you want to dig deeper.